How you doing? I'm Frank Persico with some practical guitar tips on tone. And specifically, how to get a good volume, low volume tone on a blackface or silverface or high wattage clean amp. Okay? Now, it's the whole concept of being able to get a good tone, let's say an overdriven tone, at a lower volume, like a apartment level volume, is a good exercise because the principles that we use to dial in a good tone at that low volume can be scaled up to fit a larger room, a larger venue, or just a situation where we need different frequencies of different kind of response from our amp to kind of cut through a live mix in any situation. So basically, it's not about just necessarily having the right sized amp, right, all the time. It's about how to tweak the amp and the pedals, which are going to be necessary to kind of take over the front end of the amp and give us the ability to dial in EQ, overdrive with EQ in the overdrive, and volume boost. Okay, so it's a balancing act between the volume and tone controls on the guitar, stage one of the gain stage, into our EQ in this case, where I can selectively bring down or up frequencies, all right, the amount of overdrive we choose to have at any given volume. A clean boost, which is just going to kind of give us options as far as working as almost like a final volume control if need be, and ultimately to our amp. Now keep in mind, any change we make on any control on the way into our amp or even at our amp will have a reaction or an effect on every other stage. So we have to use our ears because there's more than one way to get the right tone. As our volume changes, every variable is going to change. We're going to have to use our ears to determine what we need to adjust, which means we have to know our tools. You know, this is an EQ. You might use another brand. This is an basic overdrive pedal in the kind of style of a tube screamer. However, it has 100 hertz boost on the bottom, which I find comes in handy when you want to kind of, if you're at a low volume and you want to make up a little bit of like that kind of squishiness, for lack of a better word, you can kind of give it back a little bit of 100 hertz. And again, a clean boost. These can be used in different arrangements. You might have your own arrangement. Every different pedal is going to kind of react differently. So again, it's about having some tools and then knowing how to use them with your amp and with your ears. So let's get into the basics of it. A good example for an amp to use is this is a Vibrolux reverb, okay? It's a 35/40 watt clean Fender amp, blackface / silverface circuit. Clean, clean, clean. Loud, 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 okay? And it will overdrive, okay? But you've got to bump this volume way the heck up, and it's going to be extremely loud overdriven. And if you're just relying on the amp for overdrive, you may get lucky, and if you're in the right size room and the frequency response is right, great. You dial in that overdrive and it's just perfect. But in reality, that's very unlikely to happen. The other thing is, by just relying on the amp's overdrive and nothing more, the amp itself is going to be what's kind of called loose. You're going to have low frequency rumble, and you might not have enough mids, and you're not going to have a real tight control over the stages of gain. Stage 1, stage 2, in this case we're going through stage 3, stage 4, and then ultimately our amp, well actually, technically, our volume, our treble and bass controls here are even a stage of gain, which it's before ultimately comes out of the speaker into the room. I sound long-winded, but it's necessary to understand these principles. It's just like when you're recording vocals or guitar, you have to understand the stages that the signal goes through and how that signal could be shaped as it goes through each stage that we're choosing to put it through. Okay, let's get down to it. Generally what I like to do for this video, we're going to try to get a nice kind of overdriven tone out of a clean, loud amp that has a lot of headroom at a reasonable volume that I'll be able to talk over it, but it's not going to sound anemic and thin and brash, which sometimes people complain that, you know, an amp that's a high wattage amp can tend to sound that way, right? So what I like to do, and I don't know if I can show this on this, is if these are the controls on my guitar, okay, let's go with the bridge pickup, right? We'll go with the bridge pickup for this case. And if this is max volume on my volume control, I like to back it off, I would say 20%, 25%. Same thing with the tone, okay? That's already giving me some margin of adjustment that I could make at all times. Because remember, each stage as you adjust may require you to adjust in other stages to make up for the change you just made. For example, if I don't know, if I kick on my overdrive pedal and I find it sounds a little, I'm not getting enough cut, and I'm in the middle of playing and I don't want to turn up the tone here, I might just want to turn up the tone on my guitar a little bit. And then make up for it somewhere else when I get a minute. Back it off. You always want to leave yourself options. If you have everything dimed and turned up, you're just relying on the fact that, oh, you have the perfect tone at the perfect volume and it's going to be perfect for the situation. And in reality, everything is always changing. You don't necessarily aren't going to get that lucky. So you're going to have to rely on your ears to really dial in the tone you want. So let's start with our volume, where I said I'm bypassing every pedal. We're going into the amp. I have the amp on about 2, okay? Hopefully our guitar's in tune. Huh? What do you think? Okay. Playing an A chord. Turn it up, turn it down. Nothing exciting, just maybe a little bit of reverb. Just a plain vanilla sound. What I like to do is, let's say I roll the bass all the way off. I have no bass, and I'll just turn up the bass just until I start to get a little bit of the feel for it. And I might even back it off a little bit. I'm leaving that in my control for later, that I could bring it up if need be. But especially with a Fender amp, you don't want to go juicing the bass right away, because the tendency with this circuit is that it has too much bass, okay? But that doesn't mean you're ultimately doomed to have too much bass. It's how you control it. Okay. Volume at about 75% on the guitar. Bass is on like 2. That's an arbitrary number. Every amp is different. And with treble, so I have my treble all the way down, kind of nasally, I'll bring it up till it's got a little bit of bite. And then I'll kind of just roll it back again. So it's got a little, just where it's just starting to want to bite me. But so now I have room. You know, if I need to move that treble up at a future point, I can. Next stage, EQ. What I tend to do, and now at a bedroom level, it's not really such a big deal, but I like this MXR EQ because I can just notch out a little bit of 200, okay? Now you notice if I jack up the 200 frequency, it gets like woofy, okay? Now, that woofiness is gonna like affect my next stage. It's gonna feed that woofiness into my overdrive pedal, which isn't gonna necessarily be the most flattering sound, or maybe it will be. Again, we can come back and adjust, but... And I want to roll off some of the low end on the guitar before it even gets to the amp, okay? This way, I could ultimately add the low end back in the amp if I want. But I don't want to be a prisoner of the low end that's being fed into the amp by the guitar, okay? Okay, so now I'm going to just click on my volume boost. Okay, I'm going to skip over the stage for now. Just because I want to get an idea of the difference between the volume of my guitar and my amp and where my boost is. So, click it on, off, on. It's giving me ever so slight of a boost. Let me kick it back off again. So, I don't know if you hear the difference, but when I click on the EQ, it just kind of rolls off a little bit of this kind of muddiness at that 200 frequency. I can even take off just a slight bit of 100 maybe. I mean a slight bit. Okay. Next stage, overdrive. I'm using a Green Rhino. You can use a tube screamer and whatnot, but I like an overdrive pedal that allows me to adjust some EQ. Okay, not just mid-range, but low end too, because that gives me the ability to control how much low end I want to put back into the signal. Now, I want you to think of this as this is now the front end of my amp. These three pedals are kind of like my front end to my amp. I've already decided this is going to be my volume on the amp for the bedroom. I can even turn it down a little if I want, because I can now control the volume. See that? This is like my volume control now for my amp. Okay, let's turn the drive all the way down for now, and I'm gonna click on the overdrive pedal, and I want to see how much volume it's giving me. So how does it differ from the amp when I click it on? Well, right now it's actually taking the level down a little bit. So amp, overdrive pedal. Give me a little bit more volume than the amp is. Now, remember, I still have room on my guitar. I'm going to start rolling up the drive. Right? Not a bad overdrive sound as it is. Now, if I jack the guitar volume up, I could get a little more presence out of it, right? But it sounds a little thin, right? Maybe you can't tell that through the camera. I'm actually going to roll down the volume here. Hold on one second on the mic, because I don't want to overload the phone either. Yeah, I know the video's not all polished and whatnot, and you can see rings in my glasses from the lights, but let's just get down to it, right? So in my opinion now, I would say not a bad overdrive sound, right? A little thin. Now we're at a low volume, so what can we do? Well, we can turn up a little bit of this frequency, 100 hertz here. Now you might say, but Frank, why are you doing that? You rolled it off of the amp and now you're putting it back. I'm rolling it off of what's coming out of the guitar first, so that I can add it later. If it's already there, it's very hard to take away. But I could also add a little more back in the amp. Now again, if I turn everything off, that's where we were, and we are at a low volume. This amp can crank, okay? Now, the good thing about using these principles is, as we turn the amp up, well, we can just make adjustments elsewhere to keep that sound biting the way we want to. Because as the sound gets louder, the perceived frequency response is going to change. So, let's say I want the sound a little bit more distorted, a little bit more saturated. So let's see. I'm going to turn the volume on this down just a little. I'm going to turn the drive up higher. Now let's see what happens when I do that. For a bedroom level, I can talk over it pretty much. And we're not even breaking a sweat here. The amp is on 2. So, how many times have you gone out, let's say, to play with people or a gig or something, and you realize, man, I can't get a good sound. I have too much amp for this situation. Or sometimes you might even say, I don't have enough amp. You know, I could sit here with a Princeton, and maybe I'll do another video, a much less wattage amp, which also is kind of loud too. And I could use these boosts on these pedals to actually push more volume out of the amp, clean volume, that I can then dress up later with pedals. Okay? When I could adjust, let's say, the final volume going to the amp. I mean, that's a pretty good sound. Now, if we were to turn it up, we might have to roll some bass down. We might have to, I don't know, maybe we might have to boost certain frequencies on our 6-band. Let's say we're not cutting through enough. Maybe add a little 800. Everything is able to be adjusted in relation to everything else. And if you get that under your belt, you can really dial in your tone, the tone you want, regardless of the specific gear. As long as you have pedals you understand, and an amp you understand, and a guitar that you understand, that's doing what you need it to do, you can experiment with this. So feel free to leave any kind of comments in the comment area. I'm Frank Persico. This is some practical guitar tone tips. Let me know what you think. This is a new endeavor for me, where I do some theory tips, some playing tips, some instructions on how to play certain songs, and I just thought this might be a meaningful and useful lesson for you. Have a great day. Please like and subscribe. Look at those rings in these glasses. Have a good one.